And today we're going to analyze the running form of Usain Bolt. He is widely considered the greatest sprinter ever. He currently holds the world record for the 100 meter and 200 meter race. In this video, we will go over different aspects of his running form during the 100 meter and take a peek at what makes him so fast. First, let's take a look at the start. Now, Usain Bolt has been criticized for having a weak start, but it's definitely not as bad as some people say. To analyze it, let's take a look at Usain Bolt's famous 100 meter race where he broke the 100 meter world record. First, let's simply look at path deviation during the start. As you can see, he actually maintains a relatively straight path when sprinting. This is key, especially during a sprint, as path deviation can lead to slightly increased distance to travel, resulting in slower times. Next, let's take a look at his steps as he comes off the blocks. As you can see, compared to the other runners, the step rate itself is nothing special, and the rate is actually slower than some of the other runners here. Now, what makes him stand out is his tall stature. Longer legs do help cover more ground, however it is much harder to maintain a high step rate, so it's amazing he's somewhat keeping up in this aspect. Taller sprinters like Usain Bolt are usually at a disadvantage, especially during the dry phase. However, as you can see, he is staying up with the front. Basically, if Bolt is already up in the front during this phase of the race, he is most likely coming out on top. Now, we have looked at more quantitative aspects of his start, but let's take a look at the quality of his run as he takes his first steps. As you can see, he presents with inward rotation of those hips as the knees drive forward, and a lot of lateral weight shifting. What most people look for in an ideal sprinter is to maintain a powerful, compact running form when running. However, Bolt does not follow this mold. Actually, he would have a difficult time doing that because of his stature. Bolt instead uses compensatory strategies to maximize the rate of force production during the start. Many people usually think of muscles acting in one plane, which is forward and backward. However, there is also the frontal plane, which is side-to-side movement, as well as the transverse plane, which incorporates rotational movement. When Bolt pushes off the ground, you can tell he really uses that rotational component. You can see this as when he drives the leg forward, the knee goes inward, but then when he pushes off the ground, you can see it quickly straighten out, showing that he's pushing through the hips with some external rotation to balance it out. This little twist allows for more force produced from the legs, allowing for a stronger drive forward. Now, this type of movement affects the whole chain of the body, including the upper body. Because he basically pushes off the ground backward and slightly out, it also adds a lot of lateral weight shift side to side, as well as increased trunk rotation to counteract that huge amount of rotational force coming from the legs. Now, would this type of movement significantly limit his potential? Probably not. Even with the huge side-to-side movement, he still maintains a straight narrow path when running, as we mentioned earlier. Would slightly decreasing the lateral trunk movement lead to improved efficiency in terms of biomechanics? Maybe, but the improvements may not be as game-changing as people would have originally thought. Now, before we move on to looking at specific components of his running form after he transitions from the dry phase, let's quickly take a look at overall components of speed, which is stride frequency and stride length. Now, speed is never constant throughout the entire race and differ during different portions of the race. In this case, we will look at when Usain Bolt approaches top speed at the 60 to 70 meter segment at 12.19 meters per second. During this segment, he presents with a step rate of around 270 steps per minute. This is pretty decent, but at the most elite levels, it doesn't really stick out. He makes up for this with his step length. Based on a few calculations, he presents with a step length of 2.7 meters. That is probably one of the longest steps taken in this type of event. This has to do with him being one of the tallest sprinters participating at this world elite level, as well as having incredible force production through those legs. Multiplying this amazing step length with his decent step rate leads to his record-breaking speeds. Now, let's take a closer look at different aspects of his running form after the dry phase. I would have loved to use the same footage when he broke the 100 meter world record, but unfortunately, if you take a look at this footage, the feet are a blur. So, the footage we will be using is during the London 2012 semifinals. Here, he finishes the 100 meter race in 9.87 seconds. This isn't his best time, but we get the best side view of his form here. First, let's take a look at the landing. As you can see, he lands around the forefoot area. His heel actually barely even touches the ground throughout the entire race, and if it does, it's for a very short amount of time. Reason for landing around the forefoot is it allows for the least amount of time for the foot to roll over the ground compared to rear foot and midfoot landing. This minimal contact time on the ground is key to maintain a quick step rate. Minimal contact time coupled with a forefoot landing also means increased force production through the legs, meaning increased work on the muscles. Therefore, the muscles need to be able to handle this force, which is one of the reasons why strength training is vital for sprinters. We will stay on this frame because the next thing we will look at is positioning of the foot relative to the body center of mass. As you can see, the foot just lands slightly in front of where the body center of mass should be. For Bolt, he may have been able to bring the foot slightly closer to the body center of mass when he broke the 100-meter world record during this phase. However, he most likely did not get it under the center of mass. The only time that is possible is when you are accelerating, which is in the dry phase. Anyway, this is important to look at because the closer the foot lands to the body center of mass, the quicker the person is able to go through the running cycle, leading to faster times. Next, we will look at how the foot moves from when it first makes contact on the ground to when it pushes off. Besides appreciating how much movement he's able to do in such a short amount of time, what I'm looking at now is how far he's able to bring back those hips before the foot pushes off the ground. Reason why I look at this is sometimes sprinters overemphasize step rate, and they sacrifice backside movement of the hips in order to achieve a certain step rate. When this happens, power is lost during push-off, decreasing step length, and it may actually affect step rate as well, as the lost power could have translated to increased speed to bring the leg forward. For Bolt, you can see he brings his hips into extension prior to push-off, therefore he optimizes power generation from each stride. Now, we will look at vertical oscillation, which means the amount of up and down movement that occurs as he runs. As you can see, contrary to the lateral movement we talked about earlier, he actually does not present with much vertical movement at all as he runs. This is good as minimal vertical oscillation usually leads to decreased stress on the joints and improved efficiency during running. However, the cause of this may be more predicated to the quick step rate he is able to maintain throughout the race. As usually, the quicker the step rate, the decreased vertical oscillation that is seen. Now let's take a look at hip mobility. Here's where he presents with peak hip flexion and then peak hip extension. As you can see, he really optimizes usage of his legs during running. This allows for that smooth cyclic motion of the legs as we saw earlier. One reason for being able to extend those hips like that also has to do with his ability to maintain a slight forward tilt. I don't mean forward bending the trunk, but rather the whole body. As you can see, he presents with a pretty decent forward body tilt of 22 degrees. This aids in slightly improved momentum forward, as well as positioning for improved activation of the hip extensors, leading to increased force generated. Next, let's move on to the trunk. I already mentioned that he keeps it upright as he runs, but let's take a look at the front view. This time from when he broke the 100-meter world record. As I mentioned earlier, he does present with lateral side-to-side movement, but now we will take a closer look at it as he runs down the track. If you look closely, he actually presents with more push-off from the left leg, causing a more lateral trunk shift to the right. This is most likely due to the left leg actually being a half inch longer than the right leg due to his scoliosis. From a biomechanical standpoint, this technically leads to decreased efficiency, but I am so happy this didn't discourage Bolt from running. Even with this, Usain Bolt proves that you can still become the fastest man in the world. Moving up to the arms, let's take a look at shoulder mobility. By placing some markers to show the range of how far his shoulders moves when he runs, you can see he has great shoulder mobility. This is important, especially in sprinting, as this type of arm movement is needed to help counter the high amounts of rotational forces produced by the legs. Now taking a look at the front view, you can see that he also keeps his arms relatively close to his body and his arms barely cross midline. Finally, moving up to the head, you can see from this view that there is very little forward and backward movement going on. He keeps it relatively stabilized in a neutral position. This allows for improved core stability to help maximize force produced from the legs with minimal energy leakage. However, as everyone knows, he never maintains this position as he starts looking at his times and celebrating toward the end of the race. Honestly,